Okay, let's now move on to the second component of this wonderful instrument we call the voice. And this part of the instrument I call the intonator. And the intonator is generally a word that's at present unique to vocal nebula and the language I'm building for myself in my own training. And it's referring to the voice box or the larynx and some of the parts and muscles and cartilage all around it. The reason I like the word intonator is because I'm trying to, in my own model, develop something that's a little more musical in terms of the way I think about it. And this is where we make tone. We make tone, and the verb for that is to intonate or intonation. And so I call the part the intonator. Okay, so let's discuss this in relation to the instrument as a whole. We've already talked about the three different parts, and we have this fourth part as well, sort of what we call reduced to the word posture, and it refers to the container of the instrument, the legs and the spinal column. Whether it's three or four parts, there's really two events that happen, two things that happen in this instrument that these four parts contribute to. And I like to reduce them to the simple phrase, make sound and shape sound. So we make sound and we shape sound within from here to here, basically. So let's talk about what is actually happening when we make sound and where it happens, and what is happening when we shape sound and where does that happen. So we make sound initially, as we spoke of before, where the air pressure meets the vocal folds inside the larynx. Okay, so what is being made there? Basically, this is where the initial vowel is made, meaning we speak and we sing vowels. We create vowels here, but consonants are created up in the mouth in the resonator. What happens here from the vocal folds is we only produce vowels. So we produce a vowel at a given pitch. So the pitch of the vowel, the pitch, say like on a piano or a keyboard, is also created here. Okay, so we're creating a vowel at a given pitch, and it has volume. So the initial volume, again, we spoke about that earlier, is kind of this combination, this equilibrium or balancing act between how the vocal folds position themselves through thickness, length, tension, and the amount of air pressure that's meeting the folds. The combination of these two things are going to produce a volume. Okay, and then so now what we have is a vowel at a pitch with a volume created here. And the fourth component is tone. So tone is also like really what you'd see as a control on an old stereo, just says tone. Sometimes on the newer stereo, you'll have separate controls, bass, mid-range, and treble. So tone is basically, is it kind of deep and bassy? Is it balanced and medium? Is it bright and trebly, without any of them being right or wrong in general? Now, what you're trying to do at any given moment, you may want a certain sound. So, but what you have here is this is also created here. And though it's not actually created at the vocal folds, it's actually related to where the larynx is vertically, because the larynx can go up and down, as we're going to learn real quickly here. And it has an effect on volume, it has an effect on this tone. So we're going to think of making sound or making tone here as four things. It's the primordial vowel sound. As we'll learn, the vowel sound can be altered in the resonator. So we have the initial vowel sound at a pitch, at a volume, and a tone. Okay? That's the first of the two main events that happen in this instrument. The second event is shape sound. So we have make sound and shape sound. How do we shape sound? Well, we shape sound at this first, at the entrance to the resonator, just this last little bit of air pipe. And then, of course, in the resonator, in the head itself. And so what are the components of shaping sound? Well, first off, we can actually modify three of the parameters from making sound. We can actually we can adjust the vowel. We can refine the vowel, meaning we can alter it a little bit. We can certainly change the volume because, like I said before, if the sound is being directed up into the nasal passages, if much of the material in the head is relaxed too much, it's going to absorb a lot of the sound energy, which is lowering the volume. It kind of happens naturally anyway, because no matter what, a lot of these sound waves are going to get absorbed, even if you've done everything properly. And that's okay, because another thing we can do is we can alter the tone. So we can alter the vowel, we can alter the volume, and we can alter the tone. We can make the tone even brighter. We can add resonation, sometimes called ring, sometimes called twang, sometimes called in Italian called squillo, sometimes it's called metallic. These different, it can be called the timbre, the character of the sound, the resonation, but it's the quality. We're really, just like the body of a guitar or a violin is there to complexify or beautify the sound. That's what shaping sound is to the resonator. The one thing that the resonator does that doesn't happen in the intonator is the production of consonants. So all consonants, spoken or sung, are all created up here in and around the vowel that's created here. Okay, so that's what we do, is we make sound and we shape sound with this 3 or 4 part instrument. And what we're going to learn in the intonator is this is where the air pressure meets the folds, and this is where we make sound. So you consider this lesson on the intonator the making sound portion of these 2 parts of what we do. Okay, I want to add one other little bit here, just a little bit about this course, because this beginner course, or this first level course, which is free, is by no means any kind of teaser or bait to get you to take the next course. I want this course to stand on its own, and if you want to train your voice somewhere else, that's completely fine. And I'm not, when it's appropriate, I'm not holding anything back. And the proof of this is that you'll see is that the 2 biggest problems I have had, and I'm working to fix as a singer, are contained in this course, both the definition of the problem and the solution. You're going to get one of them here in the intonator, which is my biggest problem of all, and then you'll get the next one when we cover the resonator. So please stay tuned to this course. It's not just me. These are probably the 2 biggest problems that anyone working with the voice, singing or acting or public speaking, will face. And what makes them even more important is that they're very rarely discussed or talked about in the older tradition of vocal training and voice development, which is still by far the most prevalent way people teach the voice. And what can happen is, for example, my biggest problem, we'll talk about in a minute, was with my false vocal folds. But really, the phrase false vocal folds doesn't even exist in the traditional method. And when you learn what they are and how you can develop control over them directly, you don't have to use some of these analogies or metaphors from the older method, like that, where they might just say, open your throat. Open your throat. Well, what are they talking about? And there's many things that involves your tongue, it involves your jaw, it involves your soft palate, it involves the position of your larynx up and down, it involves the false vocal folds. And so for someone to just say, open your throat, or imagine an egg, this is another one, imagine an egg in the back of your throat, like you have to make room for a nice big egg in the back of your throat. Well, it's useful, but you end up having to really do a lot of experimenting and a lot of training to work around what that's pointing to, what it means. Well, what happens is if you have false vocal folds, and I'll bet you do, that slam shut as you go up in pitch and cause that squeezing, that self-suffocation feeling, you will understand it better, and you will be able to improve upon it and fix the problems much faster if you really know what it is and what you're working on. And that's what we're trying to do in this course and the next course and at Vocal Nebula in general. So what I want to do before we move into the details, I want to also talk about a little more knowledge, build a little more knowledge and vocabulary and theory about the instrument as a whole, as well as this portion of the instrument before we keep going. All right, so let me add right here a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more theory into this coursework that we're working on. This first course, because it's a model of how the voice works as opposed to active vocal training, some of you may already notice a little bit of the language comes from a model of the voice developed by a woman named Jo Estill, Estill. And it's the Estill model of the voice. And it doesn't have a training component. And so it's really about the model and some of these isolation and awareness exercises, but not so much deep vocal training. So I'm not certified in this Estill. I study it, and I hope one day to be certified. But where I live, it's not even possible. So please understand, I'm in no way certified to teach Estill, but I really love the model. And I'm adapting some of that language to my own, this 3-part musical instrument, although she talks about that as well, using different language. So in the Estill method, she's reduced the understanding of the moving parts within this instrument to 13 what she calls figures. And the figures, I think she used that word really she derived it from figure skating, like ice skating and figure skating, is that there's a certain basic figures that each skater has to master in order to then put them together into a performance. So she has 13 figures, which to me are like the 13 moving parts of the instrument. And we're covering most of them in this initial course. Some of them are a little too advanced. So let's take those 13 figures or 13 moving parts and kind of map them over our 3-part instrument. So as we learned in the last lesson on the aerator, she actually only has one thing she refers to in this section. She calls it torso anchoring. So what I'm calling the aerator, which is this part of our body, all around the abdomen and the back, right up until it reaches the voice box, is also called the torso, okay? So the aerator is synonymous with the torso for the most part. And what I like to call activation, or activating the aerator, getting all these muscles nice and in position, as we talked about last time, she refers to as anchoring, which I love that word. So that word kind of maps onto support and a little bit of what has been called diaphragmatic breathing. But what I like about the word anchoring or activation or even support is it has defined within it that distinction between these muscles being active and air pressure, meaning all of these muscles can be active and firm and in place and anchored, but that doesn't mean that you're pushing more air or air pressure into the vocal folds. You can actually have all of that active and be putting very little air or withdrawing air from the vocal folds if that's what's appropriate at that particular moment in time. So of the 13 figures, one of them maps out to the aerator, which she calls torso anchoring. The intonator actually has 7 of the 13 components to it. So 7 of the 13 figures in the Estill model of the voice are contained in what we're about to talk about now, is the intonator. So I'm going to list all 7 of them right now because we're not going to cover 3 of them. I'll describe them, but they're just too advanced and they need much more time to elaborate upon and to demonstrate. So of the 7, 2 of them are related to what are called now we're going to learn a distinction between true vocal folds and false vocal folds, because you actually have 2 sets of vocal folds inside the intonator. The first ones that the air will encounter are the true vocal folds, and this is where we make sound. Above them are a bigger, thicker set of folds called the false vocal folds. Their primary intention or primary purpose is actually to close off the air passage into the lungs when we're swallowing and eating food and swallowing beverages, and then to open back up to let air in and out. So it's really a valve that switches between directing things either into the lungs or ultimately into the stomach. So we have the true vocal folds and the false vocal folds, but in the Estill model, there's 2 aspects or 2 figures related to the true vocal folds. And we'll cover them in a minute, but they're really about how the onset of sound is how sound is initiated. And then really the quality of the sound in terms of some of the tonal and sound characteristics is the second component. So we have two components of the true vocal folds. We have the false vocal folds, we'll discuss in a minute. And we have the larynx position itself, which, because it can move up and down, that position affects the tonal quality, as we spoke of. So that's the fourth. So we're going to cover those four in this course. The three that we're not going to cover is, within this intonator is the thyroid cartilage, and the thyroid cartilage can be tilted. When the thyroid cartilage is tilted, it's going to produce generally a clearer tone, and it's going to add qualities that can be called sobbing or cry or whining. It's that sound that is caused by the tilting of the thyroid. There is a cartilage called the cricoid or cricoid cartilage that can also be tilted. When that's tilted, it usually helps the true vocal folds get a little thicker together, and it produces the quality that's sometimes called belting. It allows you to make a bigger, stronger sound. Okay, and we're going to cover that in the next course. Unfortunately, it's just too much for this course. And then the final of the seven figures or seven components of the Estill method inside the intonator is called the aryepiglottic sphincter. The aryepiglottic sphincter. And this particular part of the instrument allows us to alter the resonation. It allows us to, this is one of the most important parts of singing, but again, it's going to be covered in the next course because it's more of an intermediate. We do this naturally, but to learn how to do it intentionally and to control it is more of an advanced skill level. And I want to make sure we keep kind of the beginner intermediate stuff here in the beginning. So the aryepiglottic sphincter, when used properly, can actually increase or alter the harmonics of the sound to introduce resonant qualities that sometimes go by the name of ring, metallic, or the singer's formant, or twang. Okay, so those are the seven parts of the instrument that are in the intonator. The five remaining parts for the resonator I don't have on a list here, but it's the jaw, the lips, the soft palate, it's the muscles around the head and neck anchoring, and I believe the nasal quality or the nasal passages, but we'll get into that in the resonator, and I'll have time to look that up. Okay, so those are the moving parts from the Estill model of the voice and how they map out into the three parts of the musical instrument. Now let's get into the first one we're going to cover, which is the larynx position, and that'll be in the next video. And then from there, we're going to move into the two parts of the true vocal fold in the following video. And then we'll have a video about the false vocal folds, which is critical information for people who especially don't quite understand what they are. They can be your best friend and they can be your worst enemy, believe me. Okay, so let's move on.